The gigafactory loomed like a metallic behemoth against the rising sun, its sprawling structure humming with the energy of innovation. Michael stepped out of the car, clutching his battered laptop and a folder of hastily revised notes. His nerves buzzed with a mix of excitement and fear. Was this a chance to prove himself, or another stage for ridicule? Inside, a security guard escorted him through the sleek, labyrinthine hallways. Workers moved with precision, robots whirred in synchronized motions, and the air smelled faintly of metal and innovation. Michael barely had time to absorb the environment before he was ushered into a private room. There he was. Elon Musk stood by a table, reviewing a stack of papers. Dressed casually, he looked nothing like the polished image from interviews and conferences. But the intensity in his eyes was unmistakable. He glanced up as Michael entered, his expression neutral but unreadable. "Michael," Elon greeted, motioning for him to sit. "Let's see what you've got." Michael swallowed hard and fumbled with his laptop. He launched into his presentation, explaining the intricacies of his design. The room was silent except for his voice and the soft hum of the laptop's fan. Unlike the boardroom, there were no scoffs, no interruptions, just Elon's sharp gaze dissecting every word, every diagram. "And the scalability?" Elon asked suddenly, leaning forward. Michael paused, caught off guard. "It's challenging but feasible. With the right materials and funding, we could—" "Challenging is good," Elon cut in, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "If it's easy, it's not worth doing," Michael continued, growing more confident as he answered Elon's rapid-fire questions. For the first time, someone wasn't just listening, they were engaging, pushing him to think deeper. After what felt like hours, Michael finished. He looked up, his heart pounding, as Elon leaned back in his chair. "It's risky," Elon said finally, his tone thoughtful. "But the potential is enormous." He stood up, extending a hand toward Michael. "Welcome to the team. You're going to lead this project." Michael blinked, his mind struggling to process the words. "Wait, me? Lead it? Who else?" Elon said, matter-of-factly. "No one understands it better than you." Michael shook Elon's hand, his grip firm despite the whirlwind of emotions racing through him. Excitement, disbelief, and a creeping doubt. Could he really do this? Before he could voice his concerns, Elon added, "One thing you need to know. This won't be smooth sailing. People will push back, hard, some within the company, some outside of it. Are you ready for that?" Michael nodded, though his voice faltered. "I think so." Elon's smirk returned, this time with a glint of mischief. "Good. Let's make them regret underestimating you." As Michael walked out of the room, his heart pounding, he couldn't help but notice the whispers that trailed behind him. Employees exchanged glances, some curious, others skeptical. News traveled fast in a place like this, and it wasn't long before he felt the weight of 100 eyes on him. But the most unsettling gaze wasn't from the crowd. It came from a man in the corner of the hallway, a senior engineer whose name Michael didn't yet know. The man's expression was cold, calculating. He didn't say a word, but his presence lingered like a shadow as Michael passed. This wasn't just the start of a project. It was the start of a battle. The announcement spread through the company like wildfire. Michael Turner, the junior engineer whose idea had been laughed out of the room, was now leading a project personally backed by Elon Musk. In the sleek halls of the gigafactory, whispers turned to murmurs, and murmurs grew into full-fledged conversations. "Are you serious? Musk is putting him in charge?" one engineer muttered near the coffee station. "It's insane," another replied, shaking his head. "What does Musk see in him? This guy's an amateur." Michael could feel the tension whenever he walked through the corridors. The skepticism was palpable, and worse, it wasn't just coming from strangers. His newly assigned team, a mix of reluctant, mid-level engineers and green interns, was equally unsure of him. "All right, let's get started," Michael said, standing in front of a whiteboard in the project's designated workspace. The room was filled with scattered equipment, prototype parts, and skeptical faces. "We're building something that can change the future of energy, but to do that, we need to work together." A senior engineer at the back crossed his arms. "Change the future? With what exactly? A theory and a prayer?" The room chuckled and Michael clenched his jaw. He knew earning their trust wouldn't be easy, but this open resistance was more than he expected. "Look," he said, keeping his tone steady. "This isn't just a theory. The math is solid. The design works on paper. What we need is the execution. That's where all of you come in." The chuckling stopped. But the silence felt heavier. One of the interns, a young woman with a nervous smile, raised her hand. And what if it doesn't work? What if it fails? Michael paused, feeling the weight of the question. He glanced at the faces before him, some curious, others indifferent, and a few outright hostile. Then we'll learn why it didn't work, he said finally. And we'll fix it. That's how progress happens. For a moment, the room was still. Then, one of the skeptical engineers scoffed under his breath. We'll see. The meeting broke apart, and Michael stayed behind, staring at the whiteboard. Was he in over his head? He shook off the thought and dived into his notes, determined to prove himself. Later that evening, as the lab emptied, Michael found himself alone, adjusting a prototype model. The hum of machinery echoed faintly in the background when the door creaked open. He turned to see Ethan Grayson, one of the senior engineers who had been in the original meeting where his idea was mocked. What do you want? Michael asked, keeping his tone neutral. Ethan shrugged, stepping into the room. Relax, I'm not here to start anything. I just wanted to see what you're working on. Michael raised an eyebrow. Huh? And why's that? So you can laugh at it later? Maybe, Ethan said with a smirk. But then his tone softened. Or maybe, I'm curious. Musk doesn't back losers, so what makes this worth it? Michael hesitated, then motioned toward the prototype. If we can get this right, it could reduce energy storage costs by nearly 40%. It's scalable, modular, and could integrate with renewable grids worldwide. Ethan studied the design, his smirk fading. 40%? That's ambitious, almost impossible. Almost, Michael said, crossing his arms. But not entirely. Ethan nodded slowly, his skepticism giving way to cautious interest. All right, I'll bite. Show me the details. As Michael explained the concept, a small flicker of hope sparked in his chest. Maybe not everyone was against him, but later that night, as Michael packed up for the day, his phone buzzed. He frowned at the unknown number flashing on the screen. Opening the message, he felt a chill run down his spine. Watch your back. This isn't your game to win. Michael stared at the screen, his heart racing. The shadows in the corners of the lab seemed to grow darker, and for the first time, he realized this project was more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The cryptic message weighed on Michael's mind as he returned to the lab the next day. He tried to shake it off, focusing on the prototype's latest revisions, but the words lingered, watch your back. Who had sent it? Was it someone on his team or an external threat? Either way, it wasn't just a warning, it was a challenge. By mid-morning, the atmosphere in the lab had shifted. Michael's team, though still skeptical, seemed to be working with more focus. Even Ethan, the once open critic, had taken an interest, suggesting modifications and troubleshooting minor design flaws. Progress was slow, but it was happening. Just as Michael began to feel a glimmer of confidence, a technician rushed into the lab. There's an issue with the supply chain, she said, her voice tinged with urgency. Key components for the prototype's power regulators won't arrive for another week. Michael frowned, his mind racing. A week? That would set them back significantly. And with the first demonstration scheduled in just 5 days, it was a disaster. Who's handling the supply chain? He asked. The technician hesitated. It's Graham. He insisted on overseeing all orders related to this project. Michael's jaw tightened. Graham, the executive who had publicly doubted him during the announcement, was already a known antagonist. But was he petty enough to sabotage the project? Michael nodded, keeping his tone calm. Thanks for letting me know. I'll handle it. He excused himself and made his way to Graham's office. The door was slightly ajar, and as Michael approached, he could hear voices inside. Delays in place, Graham was saying. Let's see how Mr. Turner handles this one. Michael froze, his pulse quickening. It wasn't just a hunch anymore. Graham was actively working against him. He stepped back, took a deep breath, and knocked on the door. The conversation inside stopped abruptly. Come in, Graham called, his voice smooth and composed. Michael entered, keeping his expression neutral. Graham, I just heard about the delay in our power regulators. Any idea what's causing the holdup? Graham leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a faint smile. Supply chain issues. These things happen. I'm sure you'll find a way to work around it. Michael stared at him, his fists clenching at his sides. He wanted to call Graham out, to expose the sabotage, but without concrete proof, it would only make him look paranoid. Instead, he forced a smile. I see. Thanks for the update. I'll let my team know. As Michael left the office, his mind raced. He couldn't afford to lose time, or the trust of his team. Back in the lab, he gathered everyone together. We've hit a snag, he admitted, keeping his tone even. Key components for the power regulators won't arrive in time for the demonstration. But we're not stopping. We'll redesign the regulators with what we have on hand. The team exchanged doubtful looks, but Michael's determination was infectious. Even Ethan spoke up. It's a long shot, but it could work. For the next 3 days, the lab became a hive of activity. Engineers worked late into the night, improvising solutions and running endless tests. The prototype was temperamental, but progress was made inch by inch. On the eve of the demonstration, exhaustion hung heavy in the air. Michael stayed behind after the others had left, fine-tuning the final adjustments. His phone buzzed again, another unknown number. This time, the message was more direct. You should have walked away. Tomorrow, you'll regret staying. Michael's grip tightened around the phone. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to scare him. They were escalating. But instead of fear, he felt a surge of defiance. Whoever was playing these games didn't understand one thing. Michael Turner didn't quit. The next morning, the Gigafactory's testing bay was filled with executives, engineers, and key stakeholders. The air buzzed with anticipation and doubt. Michael stood in front of the sleek prototype, his heart pounding as he prepared to address the crowd. Elon Musk stood off to the side, his expression unreadable, but his presence a steadying force. This system, Michael began, gesturing toward the prototype, isn't just a new way to store energy. It's a leap forward. Today, we're going to show you why. As he activated the prototype, a low hum filled the room. Data streamed across the monitors, and for a moment, everything seemed perfect. Then, a red warning light blinked, and the hum faltered. Michael's stomach dropped as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Panic threatened to consume him, but he forced himself to stay calm. It's a minor issue, he said, stepping towards the console. I need 2 minutes to fix it. Elon raised a hand, silencing the room. You've got 2 minutes, he said. Michael dove into the system, his hands moving with practiced precision. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he bypassed the fault and rerouted the power flow. The hum stabilized, the red light disappeared, and the monitors displayed peak efficiency. The crowd erupted into applause, but the relief was short-lived. A voice from the back cut through the noise. This was staged, wasn't it? Michael turned to see Graham stepping forward, his tone dripping with accusation. How convenient that the system fails just enough for you to save the day. How do we know this wasn't a stunt? The murmurs started again, uncertainty spreading like wildfire. Michael opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Elon stepped forward. Enough, Graham, he said, his tone icy. If you have proof, present it. Otherwise, stop wasting everyone's time. Graham hesitated, clearly caught off guard, but his glare lingered on Michael. I'll find proof, he muttered before walking out. As the crowd began to disperse, Michael felt a mix of triumph and unease. The demonstration had been a success, but the battle was far from over, and as he packed up his equipment, his phone buzzed once more. This time, the message was just 3 words. We're watching you. Michael sat alone in the lab that evening, the weight of the day pressing down on him. The demonstration had gone well, but Graham's accusations and the cryptic message still gnawed at him. He replayed the events in his mind, every detail of the system's failure and recovery. Something wasn't adding up. Pulling up the system logs from the demonstration, Michael began combing through the data. Hours passed as he cross-referenced every line of code and every performance metric. Then, buried deep in the diagnostics, he found it. A line of unauthorized code, so subtle that it almost escaped detection. This wasn't a random glitch. Someone had deliberately tampered with the system. Michael leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. This wasn't just sabotage. It was calculated, designed to make him fail in front of everyone. The timing, the subtlety, the precision, it all pointed to someone with deep knowledge of the project. As he stared at the screen, the lab door creaked open. Michael turned to see Ethan Grayson standing there, holding 2 cups of coffee. Burning the midnight oil? Ethan asked, walking over and placing 1 cup on Michael's desk. Michael hesitated. Could he trust Ethan, or was he part of this? Thanks, Michael said, cautiously taking the cup. What are you doing here? Ethan shrugged, pulling up a chair. I figured you'd still be here. After today's stunt, I thought you might need a hand. Michael studied him for a moment, then decided to take a chance. He turned the laptop toward Ethan, showing him the line of code. Someone tampered with the system during the demo. Ethan frowned, leaning closer. That's not part of your original design? No, Michael said. And it's not just that. Whoever did this knew exactly where to strike. They wanted the system to fail just enough to create doubt, but not enough to destroy it completely. Ethan's expression darkened as he processed the information. That's calculated. Too calculated for someone like Graham. He's loud, but he's not subtle. Exactly, Michael said, which means it's someone else. Someone who understands this project inside and out. Ethan leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. You realize what this means, right? You're not just dealing with skepticism anymore. You're dealing with someone who wants this project dead. Someone who's willing to play dirty to make it happen. Michael nodded, the gravity of the situation sinking in. The question is, who and why? Before Ethan could respond, Michael's laptop pinged with a notification. An email from an unknown sender had arrived, the subject line reading, "This is your final warning." Michael opened it cautiously. Attached was a file containing internal company documents, confidential communications between senior executives. One email thread stood out, titled Operation Stonewall. As Michael read through the thread, his chest tightened. The emails detailed a coordinated effort to sabotage the project, orchestrated by a group of high-level individuals. Their reasons ranged from protecting vested interests to undermining Elon Musk's vision. They're scared, Ethan said, reading over Michael's shoulder. If this project succeeds, it disrupts too much. Their power, their profits, it's all at stake. Michael closed the laptop, his mind spinning. I need to take this to Elon. Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. Not yet. If you go to him without solid proof of who's involved, they'll just bury it. We need more. Michael hesitated, but Ethan was right. This wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about exposing the truth, no matter the cost. For the first time, Michael realized how deep this battle went. It wasn't just about proving himself, it was about surviving in a game far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The following days were a whirlwind of tension and secrecy. Michael, with Ethan's cautious support, began piecing together the fragments of the conspiracy outlined in the Operation Stonewall emails. Each thread led to more questions than answers. Key figures in the company had their fingerprints all over the sabotage, but none of them acted directly. It was all through proxies, intermediaries, and layers of plausible deniability. The deeper Michael dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about his project. It was about protecting the old guard, those who thrived on the existing systems and saw any disruption as a threat. And behind it all, the shadow of Graham loomed larger than ever, though Michael still couldn't prove his direct involvement. One late evening, as the lab emptied out, Ethan walked in, carrying a small USB drive. You're not going to like this, he said, dropping it onto Michael's desk. What's on it? Michael asked, eyeing the drive suspiciously. Internal communications I pulled from a secure server. It's encrypted, but I managed to break through a few layers. It's not pretty. Michael plugged in the drive and scanned through the files. Among the documents was a set of blueprints for a competing energy storage system, one that suspiciously mirrored his own. They're stealing the design, Michael said, his voice tight. Not just stealing it, Ethan said. They're planning to present it as their own after burying your project. If they can discredit you first, it'll be easy to take the credit. Michael felt a surge of anger, but forced himself to stay calm. How do we stop them? Ethan crossed his arms, his face grim. By going public. If you expose this before they can act, they won't have a choice but to back off. But that means taking a risk, a big one. Michael stared at the files, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Going public would mean defying not just the company, but the powerful individuals behind this conspiracy. If he failed, his career, and possibly more, would be over. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed, another message. You were warned. Stop digging or we'll bury you. Michael clenched his fists. Whoever was behind this thought they could scare him into submission, but they didn't realize he'd reached his breaking point. The next morning, Michael walked into the Gigafactory with a renewed sense of purpose. He carried the USB drive and a clear plan in his mind. This wasn't about proving himself anymore. It was about protecting his idea, his team, and the vision that had brought him here. But as he reached his workstation, he noticed something was off. His laptop was missing, and the prototype console had been tampered with. Panic surged through him as he scanned the room, searching for clues. Looking for this? A voice called from behind. Michael turned to see Graham standing in the doorway, holding Michael's laptop with a smug smile. You're in over your head, Turner, Graham said, stepping closer. You should have stuck to your day job. Now you've made enemies you can't handle. Michael squared his shoulders, refusing to back down. "You're behind this. All of it," Graham chuckled. "Me? I'm just a cog in the machine. But let me give you some advice. Walk away while you still can. Some battles aren't worth fighting." Michael's anger flared, but he kept his composure. "You're scared," he said, his voice steady, "because you know this project will succeed, and you'll be exposed for what you are, a fraud." Graham's smirk faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered. "Have it your way. Just don't say I didn't warn you." As Graham left, Michael felt his determination solidify. He wasn't just fighting for his project anymore. He was fighting for the truth. That night, Michael called Ethan. "It's time. We go public tomorrow." Ethan hesitated on the other end. "Are you sure? Once this is out there, there's no going back." Michael nodded, even though Ethan couldn't see him. "I'm sure. They can't silence the truth, no matter how hard they try." The next day would change everything.